When the biting wind of the Wyoming plains whips across your face, it's easy to feel forgotten by the entire world. For Miriam Jessup, that was exactly how it felt on the night she was left to die. Her 3 tiny babies bundled beneath her tattered cloak. Snow spiraled in a blinding fury outside Fort Laramie's abandoned supply shed. She had never felt the sting of betrayal so sharply, nor the cold of winter so cruelly. But in the bleakest moment, when hope was fading like the last glow of sunset on the horizon, a tall, silent stranger rode in. That stranger was a Wupur, who'd change her life forever. The wind howled over the high plains like a pack of ravenous wolves, tearing at the thin walls of the supply shed with an unrelenting intensity. Winter in the Wyoming Territory was never merciful, but this year its ferocity rivaled the harshest seasons on record. Outside, the snow fell in a blizzard swirl so thick it blotted out the moon and stars. The sky was a white void, blending seamlessly with the frozen ground. Inside the frigid shed, Miriam Jessup huddled on the dirt floor with her 3 newborns, Samuel Bonnie and Mary. Born just a month prior, they were all she had left in this world, now that her husband, Gerald, was dead. Their father had perished in a rogue bandit raid 2 weeks before Christmas, leaving Miriam to fend for herself. She still bore the emotional scars from the moment she found him. Too late to say goodbye. Too late to hold his hand in their final hour together. She clutched the babies close, pressing them against her bosom, desperate to keep them warm under a ragged woolen cloak. The cloak still smelled of Gerald's cologne in faint, lingering wisps, an earthy scent of cedar and worn leather that never ceased to remind her of his comforting presence. But her husband was gone, and Miriam found herself cast aside by the men who had promised to help. Abandoned, useless, left to die. It was the men in black coats, Gerald's so-called business associates, who shoved her into the supply shed near Fort Laramie. They flung only a single thin blanket at her feet and sneered as they locked the door, telling her that neither she nor her children were worth the trouble. They needed to cover up a few misdeeds, needed to hush the truth about some underhanded dealings that had cost her husband his life. She was a liability, and in the West, liabilities had a way of disappearing without a trace. The snow will do the work, one of them had said, with a chilling finality. At first, Miriam had screamed, fists beating on the door, voice raw from crying out for help. But the wind devoured her pleas. Every punch on the heavy wood echoed back in cold emptiness. She shouted until she could no longer utter a sound, until she sank to her knees, exhausted with the babies wailing in hungry unison. Their cries spurred her to stand again, to search for any possible escape, but the walls were sturdy, and the single window was nailed shut with battered iron bars. An hour passed, then 2. Miriam felt her limbs grow numb, her mind drifting to nightmares of the 3 small graves she feared she would dig come morning if she even lived to see the morning. The triplets had stopped crying as if they sensed the futility. She cradled them sobbing in silence, pressed to her chest in an effort to share body heat in the deathly cold. Her breath came in ragged puffs of white, swirling about her face like ghosts. She thought of Gerald's laugh, the way he'd toss his head back in sheer delight when telling a good story. She recalled how he'd gently stroke her hair each night before bed, reassuring her that tomorrow would be a bright new day. But tomorrow felt a world away now. As the storm raged on and her strength waned, Miriam prayed like never before. For a moment she gazed into the swirling darkness beyond the slats of the shed, half expecting an angel to appear. When a shadow flickered past the door, she believed it was a trick of the wind or her own delirious imagination. But then the door rattled. Her heart leapt in her chest like a startled bird. Was it one of Gerald's enemies come to finish the job? She gripped the babies protectively. Light from a lantern spilled through the crooked doorway as a tall figure pried the lock with a crowbar. Through squinted eyes, Miriam saw the glimmer of golden spurs. The man's broad shoulders were silhouetted in the glow. He cautiously stepped in, immediately spotting her on the floor. "It's all right, ma'am," he said, voice low and rumbling like distant thunder. "I'm here to help." Later, she'd never quite remember how he scooped her and the children into a sturdy wagon bed without waking the babies. She only recalled the gentleness of his hands, his soft words coaxing her to hold on, and the warmth of the furs that he draped around her once they were out of the shed. Outside, the blizzard battered them. Yet this cowboy pressed on, guiding his horse and wagon with steady confidence. So began Miriam's journey with Jackson Stone. Jackson Stone was a wanderer, a ranch hand, a man who drifted from job to job across the West. The world saw him as a drifter, but those who knew him best recognized a compassionate heart beneath his stoic exterior. He had no permanent home, though rumor said he once owned a small ranch near the Black Hills. Hard times had forced him to sell everything and take to the road with only a horse named Sundance and a loyal dog named Bandit for company. On that night of blinding snow, Jackson had been passing near Fort Laramie, searching for stable lodging for himself and his animals. He'd noticed footprints near the abandoned shed and found it odd that anyone would venture out in such a storm. When he saw a set of wagon tracks that disappeared halfway, possibly from those who left Miriam behind, his instincts told him something was terribly wrong. He wasn't the sort of man to turn a blind eye. The wind lashed at his face, stinging his cheeks a raw red as he pried open the shed door. Inside, he discovered Miriam and her babes, huddled in the dark. Frozen, terrified, their wide eyes glistening with desperation. He brought them immediately to the small cabin of a local trapper friend, old Hank Finnegan, who owed Jackson a favor from years back. Hank had a humble lodge on the outskirts of Fort Laramie, a rough but sturdy place, with a steady fireplace, enough salted meat to feed hungry mouths, and a willingness to accept wanderers in need. Jackson coaxed the half-conscious Miriam inside. He wrapped each baby in fresh blankets, his wide, calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the children. Miriam's eyes fluttered as consciousness came in fits. She tried to utter a thank you, but her voice caught in her throat. She felt the heat of the fire on her face, and the next moment everything went black. She awoke what could have been hours or days later, resting on a straw mattress with patchwork quilts. The sound of crackling fire lulled in the background. A tanned, weather-beaten face came into view. Old Hank, with silver hair sprouting wildly around his scalp. He offered a crooked smile. "You're safe now, miss." "Jackson found you," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "He's outside tending the horses." She tried to sit up, but her head spun, and she collapsed onto the makeshift pillow. Panic seized her. "My babies, where are they?" She gasped, frantic eyes searching. Hank raised a calming hand. "They're right here." He gestured toward a rocking cradle near the fire. Clearly something that had once been used by his own children, or grandchildren perhaps. They're sleeping soundly. Little angels, all three. Miriam's eyes filled with grateful tears. She recalled those moments in the shed, how she'd been sure they would freeze to death before dawn. She wanted to hold her babies, assure herself they were truly alive and well. but her body still felt too heavy. Hank brought her a canteen of warm tea, pressing it into her trembling hands. She sipped, feeling life slowly creep back into her limbs. "Thank you," she managed, voice hoarse. "And thank Mr. Jackson for me." A few minutes later, Jackson entered, carrying an armload of chopped firewood. The swirl of snow behind him confirmed the storm was still howling. He nodded politely at Miriam, a quiet acknowledgement that he was glad to see her awake. He fed more logs into the fire, coaxing bright flames that danced shadows across the cabin walls. "How are you feeling?" he asked, voice deep but gentle. "Better," she replied, shifting to see him more clearly. He was tall with sandy brown hair, curling just at the ends beneath a well-worn hat. A scar along his jaw hinted at a violent past. His eyes, though, were kind. "I owe you my life, Mr. Stone." He shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing. Call me Jackson." Miriam felt an overwhelming sense of relief and also confusion. Why had he saved her? Why was he being so kind when no one else had bothered? She fought the rising sense of vulnerability in her chest. She was a stranger, a woman with 3 infants, apparently abandoned to die. Any man with sense would have passed her by or refused to get involved. But not Jackson Stone. That night, a bruised moon hung in the sky, veiled behind swirling clouds. Miriam drifted in and out of slumber, lulled by the baby-soft breathing from the cradle and the occasional crackle of the fireplace. Each time she roused, she saw Jackson perched on a stool near the hearth, whittling a piece of wood, or simply staring into the flames. Sometimes she heard him murmur to himself, or maybe to God, about the cruelty of the world. Outside, the storm raged on for 3 days, relentless and punishing. But inside that trapper's lodge, Miriam, her children and the 2 men, formed a cocoon of safety and warmth. She clutched to that kindness like a life raft, not realizing that the challenges to come would make the storm seem a mild inconvenience. By the time the blizzard lifted, the land was blanketed in waist-high snowdrifts that sparkled in the pale winter sun. Miriam and the triplets stayed in Hank's cabin for another week while she recovered. During that time, old Hank proved to be a decent caretaker in his own gruff way, warming bottles of goat's milk for the babies and cooking hearty stews from his store of venison. Jackson came and went, checking on the animals, hauling water, gathering more wood. He was the quiet sort, never pressing Miriam about her past, only offering help where he saw it needed. But on the 7th day, a group of men arrived on horseback, a posse from the local law enforcement. Their leader, a deputy from Fort Laramie, named Deputy Horace Pinkerton, recognized Jackson as soon as he stepped onto the porch. Pinkerton was tall with a broad belly and a moustache that curled above his lip like a sneer. He didn't bother dismounting his horse, instead, looking down at Jackson as though from a throne. "I'm looking for a woman and 3 children," Pinkerton barked, voice carrying the authority that came with his badge. "By the name of Jessup." "You heard anything?" Jackson's jaw tensed. He crossed his arms over his chest boots, crunching in the snow. "Who wants to know?" Pinkerton scowled. "Don't be coy. Is she here, or isn't she?" Miriam, standing behind the window inside, felt her heart stop. She clutched the edge of the windowsill, knuckles white. She recognized Pinkerton as one of the men who used to do business with Gerald. A man rumored to be on the payroll of whichever wealthy rancher or petty criminal needed legal muscle. The sort of deputy who might help men hide a widow's body in a snowstorm if the price was right. She prayed Jackson would send him away. But how I found a woman and some babies nearly frozen to death, Jackson replied, leveling Pinkerton with a glare. Why do you want them? Pinkerton's lip curled. She's a suspect in a crime. He lied smoothly. We suspect she's run off with stolen property that belongs to a few respectable men in the territory. Jackson sensed the lie. Is that so? He stood his ground. I haven't seen any stolen property, just a mother and her babies. You sure you got your facts right? The tension was palpable. Pinkerton's horse snorted, pawing at the ground. Behind him, the other deputies shifted uneasily, glancing toward one another. They knew Jackson Stone by reputation. Some said he was once a gunslinger. Some claimed he had run-ins with outlaws, but no one was certain of his full story. Pinkerton squinted. Don't play games, Stone. Hand her over. At that moment, old Hank emerged from the cabin and strode to Jackson's side, holding his double-barreled shotgun with the casual ease of a man who knew how to use it. Did I hear you talking about taking my guest's deputy? 'Cause I don't recall offering you coffee and an invitation inside. The deputy glanced at Hank, sizing up the older man. Hank, though past his prime, had a fiery gleam in his eye. His reputation was one of a grisly frontiersman who'd survived more winters than half the territory combined. Pinkerton gritted his teeth. We'll be back. Don't you two go anywhere. He tugged his reins, spinning his horse around. The other men followed in a flurry of hooves. Within moments they were gone, kicking up clouds of snow. Jackson and Hank stood side by side, silent, watching, until the posse disappeared into the shimmering white horizon. Finally, Jackson spoke, voice heavy. He's not gonna give up easy. Hank nodded. No, he's not. You best come inside and figure out your next move. Inside, Miriam trembled. She sank onto the nearest stool, hugging her babies Bonnie Mary and Samuel closer. The mere sight of Pinkerton had brought back a flood of terrible memories, the night men in black coats barged into her home, threatening her, telling her that Gerald's death was an accident, that she should forget about any wrongdoing. Yet it was their greed that led to his murder. And now they wanted to silence her, forever. Jackson pulled up another stool and gently rested a hand on Miriam's shoulder. He claimed you stole something. She shook her head fiercely. Of course not. My husband was involved in some business deals. I don't know all the details, but I'm sure it was crooked. When Gerald tried to pull out, they killed him. They said I was next if I breathed a word of it to anyone. Hank and Jackson exchanged glances. Neither man seemed surprised this was the untamed West after all. Men with power manipulated the law like a puppet on a string. Miriam swallowed, voice trembling. I don't want to bring trouble to you both. Just tell me where I can go. I'll leave. I can't stay here. But old Hank shook his head. You leave in this snow with 3 babies, you're as good as dead. Plus Pinkerton will track you down. There's got to be another way. Jackson rested his elbows on his knees, thinking. He wasn't sure what compelled him to step further into this fiasco. Perhaps it was the haunted look in Miriam's eyes, or the helpless vulnerability of the triplets. Maybe it was his own sense of justice and guilt for not being able to save others in the past. Whatever the reason, he knew he couldn't leave Miriam to the wolves. I know a place, Jackson said. Friend of mine owns a ranch about 2 days' ride south. There's a small settlement near the railroad lines. Pinkerton might not think to look for us there right away. Miriam looked up hopefully. You'd take us there. Jackson nodded, ignoring the flutter of uncertainty in his chest. I will. We'll leave as soon as the weather allows. He glanced at old Hank. If that's all right with you. Hank? Hank managed a wry grin. "Hell, boy, you don't need my permission. Just watch your backs and keep your heads low." And with that, an unlikely plan was hatched. Little did they know how many dangers and secrets lurked on the journey south, nor the depth of betrayal that would test Miriam's resilience, Jackson's courage, and the tenuous bond that formed between them all. 2 days later, as the sun glimmered off the endless snowscape, Jackson hitched up his horse, Sundance, to a sturdy wagon borrowed from Hank. He had stocked it with provisions: salted meat, hardtack blankets, extra furs, and enough feed for Sundance to last the journey. A second horse on loan from Hank's stable was tied behind. Miriam settled into the wagon bed, arranging the triplets in a nest of cushions. She bundled them warmly, ensuring their little faces peeked out from hoods, while thick layers protected their tiny bodies from the frigid air. Anxiety twisted in her stomach. Pinkerton's threat loomed over her like a dark cloud, but she tried to cling to the hope of sanctuary. Before they departed, Hank pressed a small revolver into Jackson's hand, a battered Colt pocket percussion. "Take this. Might come in handy. And if you run into trouble, you know how to handle yourself." Jackson accepted it with a solemn nod. "Thank you, Hank. I owe you." A rare smile flickered across the old trapper's weathered face. "Just come back for a visit one day with these little ones running around. That'll be payback enough." With that, they set out. The wagon's wheels squeaked through the packed snow, Sundance's breath steaming in the cold air. Miriam glanced over her shoulder at Hank's cabin, feeling both gratitude and sorrow. She had never expected to find kindness in such a remote place. Yet now she was once again uprooted, forced to flee into uncertainty. They traveled slowly, at first careful not to break an axle on hidden ice or sink into snowdrifts. Jackson remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders following them. He knew Pinkerton wouldn't wait long before hunting them down, especially if the deputy had wealthy benefactors urging him on. The western sun arced overhead, casting long shadows by late afternoon. Miriam cradled Bonnie and Samuel in her arms, while Mary dozed in a makeshift bassinet. Jackson had draped an extra cloak around Miriam's shoulders. The temperature was slowly rising, but it remained cold enough to numb unprotected fingers and toes. They made camp at dusk, stopping in a sheltered glade near a half-frozen creek. While Jackson tied up the horses and gathered firewood, Miriam prepared what meager rations they had more for the babies than for herself. She watched Jackson's tall form moving among the pines, the glow of the setting sun painting him in russet hues. A question gnawed at her. Why was he doing this? Any rational man would have walked away. Even she, if not for her babies, might have surrendered to Pinkerton's men, just to end the cycle of fear. When Jackson returned with an armful of kindling, Miriam mustered the courage to speak. "Thank you. I can't say it enough. If it wasn't for you—" Jackson shrugged, placing the wood near the modest campfire. "Don't mention it." She studied his face, searching for clues. "You risked your life, and still do. You barely know me." He frowned, poking the fire to coax stronger flames. "I know enough. You've been dealt a bad hand. You didn't deserve what happened." His words were clipped, as though leaving much unsaid. Miriam wondered if he saw something of himself in her situation, a time he felt powerless, maybe. She recalled hearing about men who lost everything in the West, forced to roam. Perhaps Jackson had lost more than just a ranch. That night, while the babies slept in the wagon, Miriam and Jackson sat by the fire, the hush of the wilderness enveloping them. Stars spread across the sky like a silver tapestry. Jackson offered Miriam a small tin cup of coffee, and she sipped, gratefully relishing the warmth. "Tell me about your husband," Jackson said quietly. If you want to talk about him." Miriam's gaze dropped. Pain squeezed her heart. Gerald was a dreamer. Always had some new scheme or plan. He tried to strike a deal to run supplies to miners near the Montana border. Claimed he'd found a route that could cut travel time in half. But he needed investors to buy wagons and gear. That's when he got tangled up with Pinkerton's crowd. They offered the funds at a steep cost. When Gerald realized they wanted a share in more than just his profits turning him into a mule for smuggling contraband, he tried to back out. Jackson nodded grimly. He'd known men lured by quick money, only to be trapped in a labyrinth of debts and threats. And that got him killed. Tears welled in Miriam's eyes. He was supposed to meet them one last time. I begged him not to go, but he insisted he could talk sense into them or pay them back. He never came home. She inhaled a shaky breath. For weeks, I tried to find out what happened. The local law wouldn't help. Eventually, one of Gerald's ex-associates found me and warned me I was next, that if I didn't disappear, they'd make me vanish. She swallowed, voice breaking. I was alone with 3 babies. I prayed for a miracle, but no miracle came. Jackson's expression softened. Until now, he said quietly, though he didn't sound entirely sure. Miriam thought she caught a flicker of sadness in his eyes as he stared into the flickering embers. She realized that while she had shared her story, Jackson's remained a mystery. But she let the moment pass, too exhausted for more questions. They slept in shifts, Jackson insisting on keeping watch. The night passed uneventfully, though more than once Jackson imagined hearing distant hoofbeats or glimpsing shadows that made his heart pound. The West was wild, and danger lurked beyond. Criminals, wolves, cougars, or prowling bandits were always a threat. By dawn, they continued southward, forging through snowdrifts that began to recede as they descended to lower elevations. The second day of travel was rough, with freezing sleet turning to slush and mud. At one point, the wagon's wheel stuck in a deep rut, and Jackson had to unhitch Sundance and use raw strength to push the wagon free. Miriam helped where she could, holding the horses steady, praying the wheel wouldn't snap. Late that afternoon, as the golden light of dusk bathed the rolling hills, they spotted smoke rising in the distance. Jackson's friend's ranch. Relief flooded Miriam, but the moment was short-lived. Her pulse quickened when she realized they weren't alone. Far off, silhouetted against the horizon, riders approached. Jackson squinted, shading his eyes. 3 of them, he muttered, jaw tightening. They're coming fast. He turned to Miriam. I'll lead them away. You take the wagon and keep going to that ranch house. You'll see a small windmill red barn. My friend's name is Miguel Peralta. Tell him I sent you. He'll protect you. Fear spiked in Miriam's chest. But no argument, Jackson snapped in a tone that brokered no debate. If they catch up to us, you and the kids will be in danger. I need to buy you time. She wanted to protest, but the riders were closing the gap. She glanced at the triplets, at Jackson's determined face, and she nodded with trembling lips. Stay alive, she whispered. Jackson climbed onto Sundance, unfastening the lead. He kicked the horse into a gallop, veering away from the wagon, hoping to lure the pursuers. As he thundered across the white and brown terrain, Miriam seized the wagon reins. Her own heart hammered, but desperation propelled her forward. The babies whined softly, sensing the tension. She urged the horses on wheels, rattling over rough ground. Snow patches gave way to muddy earth. The ranch house grew closer, the column of smoke drifting lazily in the sky. She forced her gaze forward, refusing to look back. Jackson had risked everything to draw those men away. She had to trust him to survive. The Peralta ranch was a welcome sight, a sturdy single-story homestead with a wide porch, a barn with fresh paint, and a windmill rotating slowly in the winter breeze. The place was well maintained despite the bleak season. Miriam guided the wagon to the front, her heart lodged in her throat. Would these strangers help her? She saw no one outside, but smoke curled from the chimney, indicating someone was home. She pulled the reins, slowing the wagon. Then she hopped down unsteadily, rushing to the porch with the triplets bundled in her arms. She pounded on the door. "Hello. Is anyone there?" The door swung open abruptly to reveal a stocky man in his 40s with olive skin and dark, penetrating eyes. He wore a worn leather vest over a flannel shirt, and in one broad hand he held a shotgun. Miriam stepped back, startled, but forced herself to speak. "Please, Jackson. Stone sent me. My name is Miriam Jessup, and we're Jackson." The man's features softened in recognition. He lowered the shotgun. "Are you all right? Where's Jackson?" She shook her head. He led some men away so we could make it here. He said your name was Miguel Peralta. He said you'd help us." Miguel took in the sight of her, and the 3 babies, half frozen and muddy from travel. Though his expression was severe, compassion flickered in his eyes. "Come in quickly." He ushered her inside. The interior was warm and inviting, with a big stone fireplace at one end and sturdy wooden furniture arranged neatly. A woman appeared from another room, a petite figure with dark braided hair, wearing a flour-dusted apron. Concern etched her brow. "Miguel." "Who is this?" she asked in Spanish, tinged English. "This is Miriam," he explained. "She's with Jackson." "Sophia, can you get some blankets and maybe something for the little ones?" Sophia nodded, her face instantly, maternal as she rushed to gather supplies. Within minutes, Miriam found herself seated by the fire, the babies tended to with gentle hands. Sophia clucked softly, stroking each baby's cheek with motherly warmth. Miriam guessed she was childless, but that didn't lessen her nurturing instinct. Miguel studied Miriam. "Why are you running? And where's Jackson?" Tears threatened to spill from Miriam's eyes, but she steadied herself. "He saved us from men who want me dead. Men connected to a crooked deputy named Pinkerton. Jackson took them away from the wagon so we could get here safely. I'm terrified he won't come back." Miguel sighed, sliding a hand through his graying hair. "Jackson always had a knack for stepping into trouble he doesn't deserve. Stay as long as you need. We'll wait for him." Sophia pressed a mug of warm broth into Miriam's hands. She sipped, feeling life seep back into her bones. The triplets, tired from the journey, soon fell asleep in a makeshift crib Sophia had once used for her sister's children. Miriam felt a wave of gratitude overwhelm her, mingled with fear for Jackson's fate. She listened as the Peraltas told her how Jackson had helped them with a land dispute years ago, protecting them from a group of vigilantes who tried to burn them out. Since then, Jackson was a trusted friend, though he rarely stayed long. Hours passed. Dusk settled into night. Candles and lanterns glowed in the Peralta home, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Miriam paced anxiously, peeking out the window for any sign of a rider on the horizon. The thought of Jackson facing 3 armed men alone twisted her stomach into knots. Miguel, noticing her agitation, offered reassuring words. "He's resourceful. And lucky. Just give it time." Finally, near midnight, they heard the sound of hooves. Miriam's heart leapt, but she was too terrified to move. Miguel grabbed his shotgun, throwing open the door. Within moments, Jackson appeared in the flickering lantern light, exhausted, coated in dust, but alive. Relief flooded Miriam, nearly bringing her to tears. She ran to him, ignoring any propriety, grasping his arm. "You're hurt," she said, seeing blood on his shoulder. Jackson winced, staggering slightly. "One of them grazed me. I managed to lose them in the canyon. He exhaled sharply. "I'm all right." Miguel slung Jackson's arm over his shoulder, supporting him. Sophia rushed forward with bandages and hot water, guiding Jackson to a chair near the fireplace. Miriam stood by, trembling with relief and worry, as Sophia cleaned and dressed the wound, a nasty bullet graze that had torn through flesh. Jackson's face tightened with pain, but he kept quiet, only gripping the arm of the chair until his knuckles turned white. "How did you get away?" Miriam asked when he was finally settled. She perched on a stool across from him, still shaky. Jackson took a moment to answer, sipping water from a tin cup. "I led them into Red Rock Canyon, lured them around a bend where the cliffs converge. When they followed, the path was so narrow 2 of them tumbled off the edge, trying to get a shot. He closed his eyes. The last one chased me until I managed to put a bullet in his leg. He gave up after that, so I rode for hours to make sure he wouldn't track me here." A hush fell over the room. They all knew Pinkerton wouldn't stop, even if his men had failed this time. Still, for the moment, safety embraced them within the ranch walls. Sophia coaxed Jackson to lie down on a cot. Miriam watched from the doorway as he struggled to lower himself, fatigue etched in every muscle. Despite the danger, warmth bloomed in her chest as she realized how much he'd sacrificed for her and the children. She owed him her life, perhaps more than once now. Miriam spent the night by the Triplets, but sleep was fitful. Each time she drifted off, she relived the terror of the shed, the storm, the chase. Each time she jolted awake, heart pounding. Dawn arrived eventually, the ranch stirring to life with the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Jackson, pale but upright, joined them at the table. Miguel insisted on performing daily tasks, like feeding the animals and chopping wood, so Jackson wouldn't strain his wounded shoulder. Miriam helped Sophia with household chores, changing the babies and working in the kitchen. Despite the gloom overshadowing their plight, a small sense of normalcy formed a temporary reprieve from the chaos. But as the days turned into a week, they all knew they couldn't remain in this false peace forever. Pinkerton was out there, likely gathering more men. The question loomed, what was the next move? Miriam woke one morning to the gentle cooing of her triplets and the smell of pancakes drifting from the Peralta's kitchen. Jackson was already outside, determined to train his shoulder back to usefulness by helping Miguel repair fences that had collapsed under the weight of winter snow. The ranch, though well-equipped, was understaffed. It had been a labor of love for Miguel and Sophia to keep it thriving. That afternoon, as the triplets dozed, Miriam stepped onto the porch to catch a breath of fresh air. She found Jackson there, leaning against the railing, a hand pressed to his bandaged shoulder. A faint grimace crossed his features when he tried to move. "How's the wound?" she asked softly, stepping beside him. He inhaled the cool air. "Better than yesterday." He hesitated. "Should be good enough to ride again soon." They both stared out at the rolling plains. Patches of snow still dotted the landscape, but the roads were clearing. In the far distance, faint silhouettes of mountains peeked through the winter haze. After a moment of silence, Miriam spoke the question that had been gnawing at her for days. "What happens now?" Jackson's brows furrowed. I've been thinking about that. He paused as though choosing his words carefully. We need to get you somewhere safe away from Pinkerton and his lot. Maybe further south into Colorado territory. I heard there's a small settlement near the railroad expansion where folks don't ask too many questions. Miriam exhaled. And how long until they find me there? Keep running forever. Jackson turned to face her expression. Grave. What else can we do? You said yourself the local law is in Pinkerton's pocket. Unless we can prove they murdered your husband, they'll keep hunting you. And the triplets, he swallowed, glancing away. They deserve a chance to grow up free from this. Emotion welled in Miriam's chest, a swirl of frustration and despair. She thought of her once simple life, her dreams of raising a family in a cozy home with a garden out back. Now she was a fugitive reliant on the kindness of near strangers. She found herself unmoored, grasping for a shred of hope. Maybe there's a way to clear Gerald's name, or... Her voice wavered uncertain. If I could just find proof of what Pinkerton and his cronies did, some ledger or letter that ties them to the murder, maybe we could get real lawmen involved. Jackson's eyes flickered with interest. Did Gerald keep records? She shrugged helplessly. I don't know. He wrote in a journal sometimes, but that was lost when I fled. He had an office in our house. Or maybe at the bank. I'm not sure. She raked a hand through her hair. For all I know, they destroyed everything. Jackson placed a steadying hand on her arm. Don't fret over that now. We'll figure something out. Miriam was about to respond when they heard hooves. She froze, fear surging up her spine. Jackson's gaze locked on the horizon, scanning for the source. A lone rider approached, holding a white cloth high some sort of makeshift flag of neutrality. Miguel stepped out from behind the barn, shotgun at the ready, but Jackson signaled for caution. As the rider neared, Miriam recognized him. A young man named Billy Townsend, who had once worked with Gerald on the supply route. He seemed skittish, his eyes darting around the ranch. When he dismounted, he held up his hands, showing he was unarmed. Miriam. He panted, glancing nervously at Jackson's stern face and Miguel's shotgun. I'm not here to hurt you, I swear. I barely got away from Pinkerton's men to come find you. Heart hammering. Miriam stepped forward. Billy, what are you doing here? How did you know where to find me? Wasn't easy, Billy confessed, flicking his gaze between them. But word travels. I heard Jackson Stone was heading south, and folks around here know this ranch belongs to the Peraltas, who are friendly with him. I took a chance you'd be here. Jackson scowled. Spit it out. Why'd you come? Billy swallowed. Pinkerton is after me, too. He thinks I might know something about Gerald's ledger, the one that details all the crooked deals he was forced to be part of. Pinkerton's bosses need that ledger destroyed, or it's curtains for them. Gerald told me once he hid it at the old Plymouth mine in a strongbox near the entrance, but I never went to check it out. Miriam's heart raced. A ledger. If it contained records of those men's crimes, it might be the key to exposing them. Why didn't you come forward sooner? She demanded. Billy's face flushed with shame. I was scared. Gerald was a friend, but after they killed him, I nearly fled the territory. I couldn't sleep at night, knowing the ledger was still out there. Now Pinkerton's men cornered me, demanded I tell them everything. I gave them the slip. Came here to warn you. They know about the ledger too. Jackson's eyes narrowed. So Pinkerton might be heading for the Plymouth mine as we speak. Billy nodded. I reckon so. A buzzing tension filled the air. Miguel lowered his shotgun, processing the news. Miriam felt a surge of desperate hope. That ledger could change everything, prove Pinkerton's guilt, bring justice for Gerald, and end her nightmare. But it was also a dangerous gamble. If Pinkerton found it first, any evidence could be destroyed. Finally, Jackson spoke. "We can't just sit here. If there's a chance to get that ledger, we have to try." Sophia, who had joined them on the porch, gasped. "But that mine is dangerous. It's abandoned, prone to collapses, and Pinkerton's men could be swarming it." Miriam steeled herself, glancing at the triplets through the open doorway. She felt a mother's fierce protectiveness. "If it means our lives, our future, then I have to go." Jackson's expression flickered with concern. "No, you stay here with the Peraltas. Billy and I will go. We'll find that ledger." She shook her head adamantly. "I can't hide anymore. This is my fight, too. A standoff of wills." Miguel cleared his throat, stepping forward. "You'll need more than 2 guns if Pinkerton's men are there. I'll join you." "Sophia, can you look after the little ones?" Sophia nodded, though her face bore signs of worry. "Of course. I'll keep them safe." Jackson glanced from Miriam to Miguel to Billy. Determination filled his eyes. "Then it's settled. We ride at first light before Pinkerton can send more men. Let's hope we're not too late." At dawn, a cold mist clung to the earth like a secret not yet spoken. 4 determined riders set out from the Peralta ranch, Jackson Stone. Miriam Jessup, Miguel Peralta, and the nervously glancing Billy Townsend. Each carried not only weapons and supplies, but the burden of what lay ahead. Miriam rode with purpose, her heart pounding in rhythm with her mare's hooves. She'd left the triplets swaddled and safe in Sophia's care. If things went wrong, this ride could be the last chapter in her story. Jackson led the way, his broad shoulders tense beneath his coat. Miguel followed closely, a seasoned rifle slung across his saddle. Billy brought up the rear, chewing his lip and fidgeting with the reins. The silence between them was thick. There was little to say when riding into possible death. The Plymouth mine loomed ahead by midday, nestled in a narrow, rock-scarred valley. Long abandoned after the gold rush fizzled out its rusted rails and rotted timbers, gave the landscape a haunted quality. A crow squawked overhead, vanishing into the gloom, as if warning them to turn back. "We tie the horses here," Jackson said, reining in beneath a gnarled pine. "No sense bringing them closer if there's gunfire." They dismounted and moved forward on foot. Billy's boots crunched nervously over gravel. It should be just inside. Gerald said he stashed the ledger near the first junction, in a strong box under some old equipment. The mine entrance was a yawning mouth of darkness. Miriam hesitated at the threshold. The cold air that gusted out felt like an exhale from some ancient beast. But she pressed on, lantern in one hand, pistol tucked in her coat. Inside the mine was cramped and damp. The wooden beams groaned with age. Water dripped steadily from overhead, echoing in the silence. The air smelled of rot rust, and something else, something foul and forgotten. They moved slowly, the flickering lanterns casting long, monstrous shadows. Old carts and abandoned tools littered the path. At a fork in the tunnel, Billy stopped, pointing to a collapsed shelf and a pile of tarps. "There," he whispered. "That's where Gerald said he hid it." Jackson and Miguel approached the mound, cautiously lifting tarps and debris. Beneath a warped board, they unearthed a small iron strongbox, its lock rusted but intact. "Stand back," Jackson said, leveling his revolver. With a single shot, the lock shattered, echoing like thunder through the narrow corridors. Inside the box lay stacks of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Miriam reached in her hands, trembling, and unwrapped the top bundle. Ledger after ledger, ink-stained pages, full of names, transactions, bribes, evidence that would condemn not only Pinkerton, but the men who pulled his strings. "This is it," she whispered. "It's all here." Then came the sound none of them wanted to hear, footsteps, not their own, not echoes, real and approaching, the metallic scrape of a gun barrel against stone. Jackson extinguished his lantern with a hiss. They froze, hearts hammering. A voice rang out, venomous and familiar. "Well, hell, ain't this a cozy little reunion?" From the shadows emerged Horace Pinkerton revolver, drawn, flanked by 2 henchmen. Their lanterns lit the narrow tunnel behind them, cutting off the exit. "Thought you could sneak in and steal what's mine?" Pinkerton spat eyes wild. "Drop your weapons. All of them." Miguel cursed softly, laying his rifle on the ground. Jackson followed suit. Miriam clutched the ledger, backing up until her spine hit the cold stone wall. Pinkerton strutted forward, plucking the satchel from her arms. "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Jessup. With this gone, all your troubles come right back." "You won't get away with it," Miriam hissed. He laughed. "I already have. You think anyone's going to believe a widow, a drifter, and a half-crazed kid?" That's when the mine itself seemed to revolt. A deep groan echoed through the walls, followed by a sudden tremor. Dust rained from the ceiling. Pebbles clattered across the floor. What the one of Pinkerton's men began but was silenced by a thunderous cracking noise. The ceiling partially gave way behind them, collapsing in a blast of dust and shattered timber. The tunnel groaned again, a living, dying thing. "Move," Jackson bellowed, seizing the chaos. He tackled the nearest henchman, wresting away his gun. Miguel lunged for his rifle. Billy dove to protect the documents, shielding them with his body. Miriam ducked low, heart pounding, scrabbling toward the satchel as Pinkerton stumbled. Gunfire erupted in flashes. Jackson fired once, twice. One of the henchmen dropped, the other turned and fled blindly into the dust. Pinkerton raised his gun again, staggering. "You ruined everything." Miriam didn't think she acted. She swung the satchel at his wrist with all her strength. The revolver clattered away. Jackson slammed into Pinkerton, dragging him to the ground. They grappled, trading blows in the confined space. A beam above them cracked ominously. Miriam screamed. He rolled free just as the support collapsed, burying Pinkerton in a heap of rubble. The mine shuddered, moaning like a wounded beast. Out now. Miguel roared. They ran. Lanterns, swaying, lungs burning. They fled through the choking haze. Dust filled to their mouths. Tears stung their eyes. Behind them, the tunnel groaned a final time and collapsed completely. They burst into the daylight, coughing and gasping, collapsing onto the snow-dusted earth. The mine behind them was silent now. Buried. Billy clutched the satchel like a sacred artifact. "We got it," he panted. "We actually got it." Jackson, bleeding from a reopened shoulder wound, gave Miriam a weary smile. "I told you we'd find it." Miriam threw her arms around him, sobbing. "You saved us. Again?" "No," Jackson said, softly, resting his forehead against hers. "We saved each other." They mounted up and rode back toward the Peralta ranch, the sun casting golden beams through the winter sky. Behind them, the Plymouth mine lay entombed along with the last remnants of Horace Pinkerton's tyranny. What once was fear now became resolve. They had the proof. They had survived. And Miriam, for the first time since Gerald's death, felt something bloom within her. Hope. The morning they returned from the Plymouth mine, the Peralta ranch stood cloaked in soft golden light, as if the land itself breathed a sigh of relief. Snow still clung to the northern slopes, but spring whispered through the air, stirring branches and warming the ground beneath their feet. The windmill creaked lazily, and smoke curled from the chimney like a beacon of home. Miriam slid off her mare legs, trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. She clutched the satchel containing the ledger to her chest like it was her own heartbeat. When Sophia saw them ride in, she burst from the doorway, skirts fluttering, and raced across the yard. The triplets' cries rose in tandem from inside the cabin, as though they somehow sensed the storm had passed. Miriam barely had time to brace herself before Sophia enveloped her in a tearful hug. "Gracias a Dios," she whispered. "I prayed for you every minute." Inside the cabin smelled of stew and fresh bread. The triplets kicked in their crib cheeks, flushed with joy. Miriam gathered them into her arms, tears falling freely now, tears she had held back in the mine on the ride in her sleep-deprived silence. She pressed her face into Samuel's hair, then Bonnie's and Mary's whispering promises. "Mama's here. You're safe now. It's over." Jackson, meanwhile, slumped into a chair, his shirt clinging to the reopened wound at his shoulder. Sophia clucked and fetched clean bandages, muttering in rapid Spanish. Miguel cleaned the worst of his own cuts, his expression grim but relieved. Billy hovered in the corner, still pale, holding the ledger as if it might explode. "We have to get this to the judge," he said, voice tight. "If they find out we have it, they'll come again." Miguel nodded. "I'll ride to Cheyenne. There's a circuit judge coming through in 2 days. A good man, Judge Malcolm Reeve. Not in anyone's pocket. I'll go with Billy. We'll deliver this ourselves." "No," Jackson said, forcing himself upright. "I'll go." But Miriam stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "You're not going anywhere. You need to heal, Jackson." He opened his mouth to argue, but her eyes left no room. He sat back down reluctantly. "Be careful," he said to Miguel. Miguel nodded once. "I'll take care of it." By dusk, Miguel and Billy were gone. As the riders disappeared into the horizon, silence fell over the ranch, punctuated only by the gentle breeze and the faint gurgles of the babies playing. That night, the ranch was quiet. Miriam rocked the triplets in their crib until they drifted off. She turned toward the window, watching moonlight bathe the fields in silver. Behind her, the fire crackled. Jackson sat near it, one arm bandaged the other, resting on the arm of the chair. He looked exhausted shadows under his eyes, yet there was something in his gaze, something softer than before. Miriam approached with 2 cups of hot tea. "Sophia says this'll help with the pain," she said, handing one to him. He accepted it with a nod. "You ever think we'd make it out of that mine?" She took a seat beside him. "Part of me didn't. But then I'd look at you, and I'd remember that hope survives even in the dark." They sipped in silence for a moment. Jackson finally spoke, voice low. "I've done a lot of running in my life. From fights from the past. From myself. But you and those babies, you've given me a reason to stop." Miriam's heart clenched. "I thought I'd lost everything when Gerald died, but now I realize I've found more than I ever thought possible." He looked at her, something raw in his eyes. "I want to stay, if you'll have me." The fire popped. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, placing her hand over his. "I want that too," she whispered. Over the next few days, life settled into something like peace. Jackson's wound healed slowly under Sophia's watchful eye. Miriam fell into a rhythm, helping with chores, caring for the babies, and trading stories with Sophia. The ranch's steady hum was a balm after so much chaos. And yet each day they waited for word from Miguel, for justice, for finality. On the fourth morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Miriam froze mid-step, shading her eyes. For one terrible moment, fear returned. Was it Pinkerton? Another hunter? But as the rider drew closer, her breath caught in joy. It was Miguel with Billy riding double. Both men looked tired but triumphant. Miriam ran to greet them. Miguel held up the empty satchel and grinned. Judge Reeve accepted the evidence. Warrants have been issued. Pinkerton's patrons. Those who ordered Gerald's murder are already being arrested. The judge sent marshals to Fort Laramie to clean house. Miriam gasped. It's really happening. Miguel dismounted. Justice is on its way. And as for Pinkerton, well, he hasn't been seen since the mine. Rumors say the collapse killed him. Jackson, who had joined them at the porch, said nothing for a long beat. Then let's not count on it. That night they feasted. Sophia made tamales and honey cornbread. Miguel poured cider. Miriam laughed for the first time in weeks, really laughed. Jackson carved small toys out of wood for the triplets, and even Billy cracked a smile when the babies grabbed at his hands. Later under the stars, Jackson and Miriam walked near the fence line. The night was quiet, the stars like pinpricks of eternity. I should be terrified, Miriam whispered. But I'm not. Jackson took her hand. That's because you've already survived the worst of it. She looked up at him. What do we do now? He grinned softly. We live. That's what we do. Sometimes it's in the bleakest storms that we uncover our greatest strengths. Miriam Jessup was left to freeze on the high plains, her triplets in peril, until a wandering cowboy decided her life was worth saving. From their fateful meeting in a crumbling shed to their final stand against corruption, Miriam and Jackson's story proves that courage and love can blossom in the harshest conditions. Today, the Peralta Ranch stands as a symbol of new beginnings, where laughter echoes from every corner and no one is left behind. If you were moved by Miriam's journey from abandoned widow to cherished wife, and Jackson's transformation from drifter to devoted husband, share this tale of perseverance and redemption. Like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more epic Wild West adventures and powerful stories of hope. Together, let's keep the spirit of the frontier alive